This is a short video talking about how to solve the optional lab warm-up variables input and type conversion. Now with this lab we will learn a few things. First, we're going to learn about how to input information into Python. Secondly, we're going to learn a little bit more about how to output information to the console from Python. And we're going to learn about different types of variables. So now what does this program want us to do? Well, the first instruction we have is prompt the user to enter an integer between 0 and 155, a float, a character, and a string. So there's going to be 4 different input statements, and then output those variables on a single line separated by a space. And here is the example output. So we have 4 lines of entry and then 1 line of output. So let's start by going down. First of all, this is one of my little tricks that I use to make sure that I don't type anything wrong into zyBooks. So first of all, zyBooks down here gives us the first user input. So it's the variable's name is user int. I have an equal sign, which means assignment. So what am I assigning? I'm assigning the value associated with this input statement to user int, but before it gets assigned, I'm making sure that I'm converting it to an integer. So that's what this line means. It says, hey Python, I'm asking the user to input something. I want to make sure before I do the assignment that that is an int, and I'm going to assign it to the variable user int. So that's great. zyBooks has done the first thing for us. Now, if for example I try and run the program, I'm going to go down here and I'm going to get an error. And why am I getting an error? Well, before running this program, I put in 3 letters, AAA. This matches what's going to go in on the first input line, and we'll kind of see how zyBooks does this. It's a little different, but it works. And what happened is that I got this error. I got an error that said value error, invalid literal for int, which is base 10, AAA. That's because AAA is not an integer. If I put in the value of 14, let's see what happens if I run the program again. If I run the program again, I get the output. Now this is the wrong output, but it's still an output and it is not an error. And if I try and put in a float, let's see what happens again. Okay, so I get another value error, invalid literal for int, which is base 10, and then 13.75, which isn't an integer. Okay, so that's good. So now let's go down and add the input for the 3 other variables and then the output. So the way I get something into Python is to use the input. And what am I going to input it to? I'm going to input a variable. So I'm going to say user float equals float input. And now this is where I want to say, I'm just going to copy this so I don't type it wrong. Now you'll notice a couple of things here. I said input, enter float, and I have an open single quote and a closed single quote, which denotes what's in here as a string. And then I have this float function out here, which says I'm expecting a float, so try to convert anything that comes in as a float. Why does it have to convert? Well, it has to convert because everything brought in through the input function in Python is considered a string. So if you want to use something that comes through the input function, you have to convert it. So here I've converted it to a float. Now let's double check that I didn't make any errors just adding that line. And the nice thing about zyBooks is I can run this again and again and again and again. And if I get errors, it's fine. Okay. So what do I have here? Oh, I have my old error. Sorry. So let's put 10 and run it again. That will get rid of the first error. And now I have an error, user float. And then I get this EOF when reading a line. That means I didn't add an input to it. So this input of 10 matches the input on line 1. Now I'm going to add another input. Let's try my 13.75 again. This matches the input statement on line 4. So first input statement, second input statement, first value, second value. Now if I run the program, that's great. I get 2 input statements and there are no errors. So what else does it ask me to do up here? I have to input a character and I have to input a string. So now let's do those. I'm going to take these and I'm just going to copy them so I don't type them in wrong. I'm just going to put them down here out of the way for a minute. Don't have to worry about them. And then I'm going to have it say user char equals input, and then I'm going to say enter a character. One of the most frustrating things about using a development environment like this is that sometimes it evaluates based on spaces. And so if you forget, for example, this space right here, it'll give you an error when really all you did is forget to put a space there. So that's something to remember. And also remember that if it's just a space error, and I will always go back in and look at your lab activities, and if it's just a space error, I'm not going to take any points off for simple space errors. So that was an aside. So now I need to enter a string, and I'm going to say user stir equals, and again I'm going to copy this because it's easier than typing it, input, open parenthesis, open colon, close colon, sorry, open quote, close parenthesis, semicolon. So for the character, what character they want me to enter? Well, I know the character they want me to enter because they tell me here, and I know the string they want me to enter because they tell me here. So my next input is going to be a lowercase z, and then the string is going to be howdy. So let's run the program. Okay, well, I didn't do something right, did I? What did I forget? I forgot a new line. So that is a new line character. It is a silent character, which means it doesn't necessarily show up as a letter, but it is still something that is definitely needed. So I forgot the new line statement. So now I'm going to run this again. And all my input statements are correct. So now I want to look at the output statement. The output statement is simply each of the values separated by a space. So, and I got the first two values wrong. I'm going to go back to 99 and 3.77. So let me do 99 here. Let me do 3.77 here because zyBooks wants their values. And now I'm going to output. Well, how do I output something to the console? I use the print function. So the print function basically says, I'm going to send it to a console. Well, what am I going to send to a console? What I'm going to send to a console is the value of the variable user float, user int, user float, user char, and user stir. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, let's see, I'm going to say percent %d, which is the input character for int, space, %f, which is float, and then %s, %s, %, and this is a formatted output. And then I'm going to say user int, user float, user char, and user stir. Let's see what happens if I made any mistakes. I did not, except, look at this. This is not right. So I just have this printed out, this float printed out in some way, but not in the right way. So it's going to be 0.2f. So I only want two things after the decimal point. So I run the program, and now I get the right output. So that gives me the first part of the program. So let's see what they want the program extended to. It says extend to also input in reverse. So now I want to go backwards. Well, that's pretty easy. I just add another print statement. In fact, I'm going to say print %s, %s. Then it's going to be the float, so that's going to be %.2f, then %d. And I'm going to have it be user stir, user char, user float, and user int. Let's see what happens. And I didn't do that right. Print. That's because I used a comma here instead of a %. There we go. Run the program. So there's the output. It's the way I expect it. So now let's go to the third and final part of this lab. It says extend to convert the integer to a character using the char function and output the character. So now I want to say 99 converted into a char is C. So let's do that. And let's do this. Print. But I don't want this here. I want this to be a %d because it's going to be a %s. And now I'm going to say, and this is going to be a %. I'm going to do %d. And I'm going to say %user int, comma space char, user int. I think that's correct. And we'll see what happens. I might have to do that conversion outside the print statement. Let's see if I give myself a big old error. I gave myself a big old error. Error name char is not defined. So let's go back and look at what I did wrong. CHR. CHR would be the right function name. So now it's correct. I named the function incorrectly. It should have been CHR rather than CHAR. So now let me run the program. And there's my output. So this was just an example of how to go through a zyBooks lab and and follow the instructions on how to get the program solved. So and as always, if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm going to snapshot this, just leave this here for a second so you guys can see what it is that we did, because you'll probably want to attempt to type this in. Remember, cases and spaces matter. So this is a big I, this is a big I, this is a big I, and this is a big I. If you use the lowercase I, it won't work. The same with the letter F in user float, the letter C in user char, and the letter S in user stir.